Well, good morning, everybody. I want to welcome you to our third educational webinar for 2023. On behalf of Paul and Adam and Kelly and Georgianne and everybody else in our office, I want to welcome you. And again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. My name is Tim Kimmel. I'm a chief financial advisor here at Paul Ried Financial Group. I've been with Paul for 31 years, so I've had the pleasure of meeting with a lot of you and getting to know many of you and your families. So it's been a privilege. Today, we're going to unpack one of the pivotal legislation issues that have come about here in the last number of years. The legislation is called the Secure Act. Actually, Secure Act was passed in two phases. Phase one was the Secure Act 1.0, if you want to call it that, the original Secure Act that was passed in 2019, the end of the year. And then the Secure Act 2.0 was actually passed on December 29th of 2022. So just recently, and went into effect. Some of the provisions went into effect in 2023, and a lot of what you're going to hear about are provisions that are going to go into effect in 2024 and 2025, and even a little bit beyond. So today we're going to again unpack some of the legislation that again centers on the Secure Act 2.0 and how it impacts you directly. Keep in mind that the legislation affects those of you that are not yet retired, but also those of you that are retired. So this legislation is far-reaching, and again, really has something for everybody, which is one of the reasons why we felt it was applicable to bring it to your attention and to try to educate you on some of these provisions that could be impactful to your retirement. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by with Adam Jordan, our Director of Investments, Paul Ried, our CEO, founder, and president of Paul Ried Financial Group. So they're going to join us a little bit later today. The idea here is that we're going to have a little bit of what I'll call an advisor roundtable, just kind of a discussion related to some of these, again, principles and provisions within the Secure Act. And each of us are going to kind of take on different provisions and kind of expand on some of these, again, for your education. Our goal, as always, during these webinars is one, to have fun, two, to make this understandable and easy to kind of digest, so to speak, to finish on time, and to get your feedback and participation by the questions and answers that time that we're going to have at the end of our session. So you can participate. We enjoy your questions, and we've dedicated quite a bit of time today for those questions. So if anything comes up, anything at all, we invite you to ask questions. The way to do that, just a little bit of administration, is that on the bottom of your screen, there's a few tabs or icons. One of those tabs is the Q&A tab, and you just click on that, type in your question, and ultimately, at the end of our time, we'll go ahead and collect some of these questions and address it to either Paul, Adam, or myself. And if we can't get to all the questions, which is very possible, we will have somebody from our advisory team reach out to you and address your question specifically. But we will do our best to try to, again, unpack a lot of these pieces of this legislation and make it understandable and get your questions addressed, okay? But before we bring Paul and Adam on, I want to provide you with a little bit of an overview of what the Secure Act is. For those of you that may not be familiar with the Secure Act, the Secure stands for Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement. And like I said, it was actually passed in two phases. There are 92 provisions within the Secure Act 2.0. It kind of engulfed Secure Act and Secure Act 2.0. Again, 92 provisions total. Some of those, like I said, are pre and some are post-retirement provisions. And it was passed with bipartisan support. I'm just going to read this to you. It says, in the House of Representatives, there was 103 sponsors, 55 Democrat and 48 Republicans. In the Senate, it was sponsored by 11 participants, 6 Republicans and 5 Democrats. So again, bipartisan support. And really the goal of the Secure Act, just so you know, is really 3 parts. One is getting more participants into the retirement system and encouraging people to save for their retirement. Second goal, I'll say, is to improve the retirement rules and make those more flexible and easy to understand. I'm not sure how well they did at that, but nonetheless, that's the reason for our seminar today. And then 3 is to lower the cost of these type of plans to make it a little bit more inviting for companies that are maybe smaller in size to incorporate 401k plans to their employees. So those are kind of the reasons. Now, there are parts of this Secure Act that are what I'll call mandatory, right? That'll go into effect pretty much, like I said, over the period of 2023, 2024, and 2025. But those are mandatory. And then those, some of which of those provisions are optional. Typically, it's the employer that has the choice in some of these employer-driven provisions to either incorporate these provisions or not to incorporate. So again, some of these things may be very specific. If you're not retired and you're currently working, it might be very pertinent to address your plan administrator, and if these things might be applicable to you or of interest to you, you might want to ask the plan administrator if they're adopting these or not. So again, some of these things, again, are mandatory, some are not. And again, part of what we're going to unpack today are some of those provisions on both sides. So today we're going to cover not all 92 provisions, thankfully. We don't have the time for that, but we're going to unpack about 10 or 11 of the provisions. Like I said, some that are affecting folks before retirement, some that are affecting folks after. So I'll say our session today is really broken down into 3 parts. Part 1 is just to kind of make it easy. We're going to address 4 or 5 provisions that affect those of you that are not yet retired, still working in the workforce. And then we're going to address the second phase of our session, the part that's going to affect those that are retired. And those are where some of the more significant changes come in. And we'll, like I said, unpack some of that today. And then the third part of our session today, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be our Q&A session, and give you the ability to ask any questions that you might have on your minds. So with that, let's go ahead and invite Paul and Adam into our conversation and get things going. So welcome, Paul and Adam, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to start, Paul, by kind of throwing things to you first, right? There's a few provisions. Again, we're going to address things that are affecting folks before they retire in our first part, and then after they retire in the second part. So this first part, there's a few provisions that you want to unpack for us. Again, affecting those that aren't yet retired. So go ahead and take the mic.
Sure. Thank you, Tim, and thanks for that great introduction. One of the big enhancements to retirement, because remember what's really happening, folks, is that their Social Security system is kind of in jeopardy a bit, so they're trying to enhance participation for those that are nearing retirement. One of the big enhancements is an increase or a change in the income catch-up contribution. Now, you might recall in a 401k, if you have employee elected contributions, it's $22,500. Now, it doesn't include the company match. It doesn't include the company contribution. And by the way, that's indexed for inflation. That's the way it's been right now. Good example, last year in 2022, that was $20,500. Well, what we also have is a catch-up provision within a 401k plan. Now, the way it currently stands is if you're age 50 or over, you can add another $7,500 in that plan. And that stays as is. That was brought in by Secure Act 1.0, designed to encourage folks to add more to a plan if they have the means to do that. Well, what happened was the Secure Act 2.0 actually has, I'm going to call it a super catch-up. And that super catch-up is if you're age 60, 61, 62, or 63, then what you can do is add $10,000 into the plan, not $7,500, but $10,000 in the plan. Now, what happens is the language is a little bit, not to get in the weeds too much, but you'll see there's interpretation here too. And so we're just seeing some of the interpretation roll out with some of the articles you might be reading, some of the things that we're researching, by the way. So the way that law says is it's $10,000 or 150% of the previous of the catch-up. So let me just unpack that just a little bit as well. So the catch-up is $7,500 right now. Now, if I take 150% of that, comes down to $11,250. So therefore, if this were to be enacted right now, 11,250 would be the additional amount that one could add to a 401k. If you're for Boeing or Microsoft or anything, like any company has a 401k plan, you can do that. Obviously, you need to elect to do that. And that provision takes effect in 2024. So number one, it's the change in the catch-up, in the increase, call it the super catch-up, if you will. Second thing that has been changed about the catch-up is if you're earning over $145,000 the previous year, then what Secure Act 2.0 says is that catch-up cannot be pre-tax. Let me back up a little bit. Remember, in a 401k, we can do a pre-tax contribution naturally, which means the money goes in tax. It means basically you don't pay income on that. It goes in, it's pre-tax, it's tax deferred. Of course, what you can also do in many plans is you can put Roth money in. You can elect Roth. So you pay tax on it, goes into a plan, same limits apply, and it grows tax-free. Well, what the provision of Secure Act 2.0 said, if you have $145,000 of taxable income in the prior year, your catch-up, remember that's the 10,000 or the 7,500, must be Roth. So that's a provision, and what happens there too. Again, Tim mentioned that there's various implementation timing here. Well, that was scheduled to go into effect in 2024. There was a lot of pushback by corporations and trustees of 401k plans because that's a big change to try and implement very quickly. So the rules have changed. An interpretation, or actually a provision, came out in August that said that's going to be delayed until 2026. So again, that's the catch-up for 401k. Same thing, by the way, applies to IRAs in a little bit different way. IRAs, same thing. $7,500 is your IRA limit. Remember, it was $6,500. The catch-up is $1,000, so total of $7,500. And then, of course, we have that provision for the 401k as well. The other area I wanted to bring up about a catch-up, and it's about the employee match. And right now, you're getting, if you're working, or if you've got, sons, daughters that are working, of course, they're adding money to a plan, and maybe the company's matching that. And all the matches currently are pre-tax. So there is a provision that's in place in Secure Act 2.0 that says the company now can match in Roth if they provide that within their plan language. So now, once again, this is all relatively new. Our understanding or interpretation would be, first of all, the plan itself or the employer itself with their trustee needs to determine if that's a provision they want to build into their plan, i.e. letting employees, putting their match that way. And then it's giving employees the option of doing that. If employee selects that I want the Roth contribution, or I want the Roth match, then what's going to happen is that the employer will match their, if it's 50 cents on the dollar, whatever it happens to be, they'll put that into a Roth. But in that case, the employee pays taxes on it. So just recognize there's a strategy here. And what you're going to find is, as Adam and I and Tim go through this, you'll find that we're going through this. And for those that apply, for those of you that this applies to, and it will be certainly those in retirement, there's some strategy that you might want to discuss with us as well if it applies to you. But those are two provisions I would say, Tim, for the catch-up and then the employer match.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Paul. A couple of things just to highlight on top of what Paul's already stated. Keep in mind, folks, that the catch-up provision is only available for those folks that are over 50 years old. So again, if you're not yet 50, right, and still working, the reality is that, okay, well, the catch-up provisions, again, only are applicable to those that are 50 and older. The other thing too is that for the idea of the taxation of contributions above, as far as catch-ups above the 145, to Paul's point, right, that's now has to go into a Roth. And the reason behind that, as you probably can gather, is that the government wants their tax money. And so again, instead of having that money go tax deferred, it's actually going in, basically it's taxed before it goes into the Roth contribution for the catch-up. So again, government giveth and taketh away, right? And the reality is that some of these provisions, again, you have to think about how it affects your specific planning as Paul mentioned, I mean, the catch up and other provisions definitely have applications, and that's something that you would want to go through with Kelly or myself or Adam or Paul, obviously, when we have our meetings. Okay. Very good, Adam. Let's turn to you now for a few of the provisions. One thing that I want, if you could address, maybe some there's student loan or student debt retirement benefits, right? So that's something that if you could unpack. And then two, for those of you that are prior to retirement, and even those of you that are retirement, some of our clients have contributed to 529 plans for kids or grandkids, right? And so there are some provisions that change the 529 provisions and allow for a rollover. So Adam, do you want to unpack some of that for us?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, the student loan debt is kind of a hot topic currently in all the legislation and political discussions. And so this is a big benefit, but again, it's something that plans can choose to or not impose there, but it will go into effect in 2024. They're giving plans the ability to offer the option of, obviously, with student loan debt being such a big issue and such a burden for so many people, they've had to choose between essentially, am I going to contribute more money to my 401k plan, or am I going to pay down my student debt? And obviously, when you have something like a match involved, where let's say they're matching dollar for dollar, $5,000, the company's going to put in $5,000 of their own money on that. You're kind of saying, well, maybe I'll put that in the plan and not pay down my student loan debt. But the government wants to incentivize essentially being able to kind of get the best of both worlds, where you can choose to pay down your student debt and still be eligible for that match. So essentially, if you choose to take that $5,000 and instead of contributing to the plan, you choose to pay down your student debt with that $5,000, that gives the company the ability to take your payment that goes to student debt as your contribution. So they can now match that $5,000 in your plan. So it is a really good benefit. So we'll see how, again, plans are eligible to roll this out in 2024. So it might take some time because of the implementation reasons. It might take them time to decide to implement that. And it doesn't only, key point is it doesn't only apply to your own student debt. If your spouse has student loan debt, it would also apply to payments that go to your spouse's or even your dependents' student loan debt. So that is a big benefit. Again, goes into effect in 2024. So again, we'll see how many plans roll that out, but a lot have tried to do variations of this before this provision came out. And so I think, it'll be definitely a big benefit if they do implement that. But also going back to the 529 plans, this is again, a very flexible, good thing about 529 plans currently, you contribute to a 529 plan. They've been good at the fact that they're flexible now as far as, you can change beneficiaries on them and things like that. But what they've rolled out now is the ability to, let's say you funded a 529 plan, maybe the beneficiary has decided not to go to college. What they allow now to do is to convert that 529 plan money into a Roth IRA for that beneficiary. So instead of this being contributions you made for their college, since they decided not to go there, or maybe the 529 plan was overfunded, more than their college costs, then what's left over can now go to benefit that beneficiary, again, kind of on a tax-free growth basis for retirement. So there are obviously huge benefits there, but there are caveats and ways and things people need to be aware of, limits on that obviously as well. The main limit being a lifetime limit conversion per beneficiary of $35,000. So that's the max amount. And another key aspect is you cannot convert that all at once. So you can't say in 1 year you're moving all the $35,000 from the 529 to the Roth. it is subject to the normal annual contribution limits. So currently that'd be $6,500. So it would take about 5 or 6 years to fully convert that lifetime max into a Roth account. Another key aspect here is you can't just fund, a 529, 3 years prior and then convert, use that for college quickly and then convert that to a Roth. They do say the 529 plan has to be established 15 years prior. So before you can make any conversions into a Roth, the 529 plan had to have been opened 15 years prior. So that's one big caveat, and it's per beneficiary. So if you change beneficiaries, that starts the 15-year time over again. Another aspect would be you can't just open it 15 years ago with, say, $1,000 and then 2 years ago contributed 15,000, and you can't now convert all of that. They have a 5-year window. So anything you contributed within the 5 years cannot be converted to a Roth. So you have to wait, any contributions have to wait 5 years before they can be contributed. So if you contributed 1,000, 15 years ago and 15,000 2 years ago, right now you can only convert that 1,000 you originally contributed, and then obviously wait the extra years. When that other contribution becomes 5 years old, you can begin converting that. So again, there's caveats. Account has to be 15 years old for that beneficiary. Money has to have been in there for 5 years. $35,000 lifetime conversion limit. But it makes things very flexible as far as funding. You don't always know what those beneficiaries are going to be doing as far as schooling, and so it does make that money continue to grow tax-free, just for a different purpose.
Adam, question for you: do the beneficiaries need earned income for the conversion to occur?
Yeah, very good point. So it applies to all regular contribution limits. So not only the amount per year that you can contribute, but the beneficiary has to also meet the income limits. So they have to have earned income of that amount as well to be able to contribute that.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Adam. Great information. Now let's turn to our second part. Oh, one other thing too before I go on is that for some of you, and this is information again for maybe kids or grandkids, is that one of the other provisions affecting those that are prior to retirement is now employers have what is called an auto enrollment program, which means that once you become hired on at a firm, you're automatically enrolled in the 401k. Rather than you having to kind of make steps to enroll, they automatically enroll you. The maximum enrollment percentage, right, that they'll deduct from your paycheck is 3% with 1% escalators, and it can't go beyond typically 10% or maximum of 15% in some plan sponsor or 401k providers. So that's something too that again is trying to get people to contribute and participate in their retirement plans through their employers, and again, just incentive or just getting that familiarity with those contributions coming out of your paycheck, and again, trying to enhance the ability for Americans to save for their own retirement. So that's a key provision. So now just keep in mind that if you are hired, bring on, have a new job, have a 401k, they'll automatically enroll you. And in fact, if you don't want to be enrolled, you actually have to tell them not to enroll you. So it's instead of you enacting or incorporating the steps to have a 401k provided for you and enroll, they automatically enroll you, and to not participate, you have to select yourself out of the program versus into the program. So another provision, right, of how the Secure Act is impacting and encouraging, again, folks to save for the retirement. So with that said, now let's transition to our next part, which is again where I think a lot of the meat is. So again, good to get to it. And that's affecting folks that are already retired. And so, Paul, I'm going to start with you. A couple of big provisions in the Secure Act 2.0 affect those with what are called required minimum distributions. For those of you that are beyond 70.5, right? That is a provision that affects you. So Paul, do you want to unpack the new provisions outlined in the Secure Act 2.0?
You bet. And I'll just add one more to the early retirement area. Just be aware that also within the Secure Act 2.0, there are certain liquidity provisions. There's a relief of penalty, and that's disaster relief and some emergency as well. So that's covered in the act. And just wanted to let you know that there is a $22,000 relief that you can pull out of your plan if there's a disaster, federal disaster. So the takeaway from this, again, doesn't affect an awful lot of people. Takeaway from this is there's additional liquidity provisions in there for those that are still working as well. Well, Tim, you mentioned the RMD, and I think that's a big area that a lot of us are interested in. A lot of the folks attending are. So what happened, as you know, and many of you that have been, with us for a long time know that the RMD age used to be 70.5. In fact, in the year that you're in 70.5. Well, Secure Act 2.0 changed that, and was moved to 72. Well, Secure Act 2.0 moved that to 73, and the best way to think about that is, and by the way, it does change to 75 in the year 2033. So thinking about that, and to think about your birth year, if you're born between 1951 and 1959, your age 73 RMD. That's when your RMD begins. Now, what also happens is the RMD table necessarily didn't change. So what happens, it changed a little bit, but what happened is that percentage that needed to be taken out previously is about the same as it was before. And then if you're born 1960 or later, your RMD age is 75. Now, of course, remember, you can take out as much as you want or as little as you want up to that time. That RMD age just applies to the mandatory distribution that needs to be taken out. Now, the other area besides the RMD, the other area is the penalty for not taking your RMD. That changed. Under the current rules, prior to Secure Act 2.0, if you missed an RMD, a required minimum distribution, the penalty was actually 50% of the amount you should have taken out. Pretty severe penalty. Well, now under Secure Act 2.0, the old rule has gone away. The new rule is if you miss your RMD, the penalty is 25% of that amount that you didn't take out. So if your RMD was $10,000, you missed it during that tax year, you take out the $10,000 plus the 25 plus $2,500, that's 25%. That's the penalty. Now, there is a provision there as well that goes one step further. And it says if you took if you acted in a timely fashion, and the readings that we have vary a little bit in this. One says is if it's taken out within 2 years of the time you should have taken it out. In other words, you missed it the first year, you didn't take it out that year, but the second year you caught it, then the penalty is reduced to 10%. And the other reading that we looked at is just it has to be done in a timely fashion. The point is that the early withdrawal penalties, or I should say timely, is that the missed RMD penalties have changed. Now, let me add one more item to that too. This is just from our experience over the last 30 years. We found that as folks have come to us, is when some folks, they've come to us and we've, in our reviews, inadvertently, previously, they missed their RMD, maybe with a different situation. Well, we've written a letter typically, or had the clients write a letter, and that penalty has been waived. So the IRS has been more apt to waive a 50% penalty. Now, as we read into this, what we believe is going to happen is that, and hopefully nobody misses their RMD, what's going to happen is the IRS is going to be more inclined to enforce the penalty now, simply because it's at a more at a reduced level and a more palatable level. But so Tim, it's the RMD changes, and it's that missed RMD penalty that's changed in that area.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. Go ahead, Adam.
I was also going to add just one other part is talk about the enforcement of those penalties. There was one other thing added as well that has to do with the statute of limitations for the IRS to enforce that. So one positive that also was added in there was a statute of limitations of 3 years. So the IRS only has 3 years now to be able to enforce that rule or that penalty. So if you missed it, 5 years ago, and that statute of limitations would have passed. Currently, there's essentially no statute of limitations on enforcing those penalties unless you found the penalty yourself. If you realized you made a mistake 2 years ago and report that, then that act starts the statute of limitations. But if you didn't find the error yourself, they can come back 7 years from there and enforce the penalty. So there is a 3-year statute of limitations now on those.
And generally what's happened, just to add to what Adam said, also generally when you find it, the idea is you want to correct it as soon as possible. That's been the process, and that's what the IRS is looking for. But again, these kind of sweeping changes, again, there's strategy involved in some of this as well. And like we said, hopefully nobody misses their RMD.
One of the things too, just to add on top of what Adam and Paul said as well, is that some of you might have said, well, wait a minute, I was 72 and I was required to take a required withdrawal. Keep in mind that that was part of the Secure Act, original Secure Act, right? Which obviously went into effect in 2019, that affected folks in 2021 and 2022. And then the Secure Act 2.0 got passed in December 29th of 2022, that pushed out, to Paul's point, the required withdrawal from 72 to 73. So again, there's some of you that might be listening saying, wait a minute, Paul said 73, but again, 72 actually is what the original Secure Act pushed the mandatory age to, and now it's been pushed again to from 72 to 73 and eventually to 75, to Paul's point. So again, a lot of different nuances to these provisions that need to be kind of unpacked and undressed. And the reality is that, like I said, it doesn't affect everybody equally. It just depends on when your birthday falls on some of that. And the
biggest takeaway,
takeaway,
I think, just so it's really clear, if you're taking an RMD right now on a schedule and you've met with us, I mean, we've really incorporated all that. So if you're thinking, gee, am I taking the right amount out?
Yeah.
Just recognize we are on top of that and make sure that we incorporate any change that might affect you in the planning that you do and the planning sessions that we have.
Yeah. Just to add too, I mean, what we do as part of our routine end of the year kind of provision is that we go through everybody's ages, everybody's accounts, and make sure that those of you that are required to take these RMDs, these required minimum distributions, you're either the issue is either addressed in a planning session with one of the advisors, or myself or Jason or Stan, one of our team members, will reach out to you and make sure that one, you're aware of what the requirement is, and two, that there's provisions to get that accomplished again before December 31, which is the deadline. So that's something that we as your advisory team take on, again, just part of our services to you, and an important one, because we don't want obviously to get crossways with the IRS by any means. Very good. So thank you, Paul and Adam, for that. And then the other pretty big provision here in the Secure Act 2.0 affects beneficiaries. So Adam, do you want to kind of take that one?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the kind of biggest areas that has also caused most changes and most confusion. Not only just for the regular observer, but even those that follow this very closely. And the IRS has had to come out with many clarifications, and there's still ongoing discussions. But obviously, as Tim and Paul mentioned, this is all about the government being able to shore up finances and things like that. So one of the big aspects of this is kind of basically the thrust of it is taking away the ability for as many people to stretch out. So beneficiaries of IRAs, taking away that ability to stretch out the amount of time that you take these distributions over. And so this primarily affects non-spousal beneficiaries. And so what this does is most categories, so most non-spousal beneficiaries are now required to essentially liquidate the IRA over a 10-year period. And so there's only a few exceptions for that, and that would be minor children, those with disability or chronic illness, or the bigger category would be those that are not more than 10 years younger than the previous owner. So let's say you're 70 and your beneficiary is 65, they are not subject to that 10-year rule. They are still able to take that out over their life expectancy. So that's the biggest category that's exempt from this rule. They're called eligible designated beneficiaries. But everyone else essentially is subject to this 10-year rule of emptying the IRA over a 10-year period. Where the confusion has come is, how do you take that over the 10 years? And this is many debates about this and IRS clarifications. Many had assumed that you could wait until the end of that 10 years and just liquidate it all. Obviously, tax planning wise, that might not be the best strategy anyway, because you're going to take a big tax hit on that end year. It might be better anyway, tax wise, to spread that out over many years. But obviously the government, would like to get that money probably earlier. And so their interpretation has changed. So people's assumption was that you could wait. They have come out with clarifications that are saying that you are required to take out a minimum amount each year of those 10 years, and then you can liquidate the remainder at the end. But they've come out with clarifications because so many people assumed that you could wait the 10 years that they had to come out with clarifications saying, well, essentially, we understand the confusion. So we are essentially for last year, for basically anyone post 2020, because this is when the new rules came in limiting, because kind of part of the Secure Act 1.0 is what kind of limited that stretch amount. But what they did in 2020, they came out saying anyone who didn't take out money in 2022, you're not subject to a penalty, even though the IRS is saying you were required to take something out. We understand the confusion. I mean, they don't say that part, but they basically say we're going to waive the penalty for if you did not take out money in 2022. And continued confusion has gone on about the interpretation, and they've come out with a subsequent one this year saying this year they're also not going to enforce any penalty for someone that does not take a distribution. So effectively, since there's no penalty, that effectively makes it not a required amount. I mean, technically it's required under the law according to the IRS, but there's no penalty for it. So effectively you have no need to take out that amount this year. What will happen in future years, where people are thinking that it's now that they've give out two clarifications, it's believed that in 2024, they'll need to start going by the rule. But again, it's a very debated topic. But current standing and beliefs are that you will need to take out money in each of those years. Now, there are people that are exempt from this, and as I said, it's essentially the minor children, disabled, or those that are not 10 years younger, and they can still continue to stretch those out. Minor children do become subject to the 10-year rule, though, once they become age of majority, unless they're in college and things like that can stretch it out a little bit longer. I believe up to age 26 if they're have some schooling and things like that. But for the most part, it's really taken away the ability to stretch out these payments. One aspect that in regards to spousal beneficiaries, though, that is beneficial, there is a new option coming out in I believe it's 2024, a new option for spousal beneficiaries. Currently, spousal beneficiaries can either take the IRA as their own and just treat it as their own. They could, or let's say the old account owner, so the deceased account owner was younger, they can currently delay the RMD payments until they would have each reached RMD age, but the spouse then must take it based on their age, not the other person, not the deceased owner's age. So you can wait, you can delay it, but then the payment's going to be higher than it otherwise would be. The new option becoming available in 2024 is to treat the account as the deceased owner. And so essentially this would mean that if they were 5 years younger, you can delay it for those 5 or however long until their RMD age. And then once they hit it, you will use their age for the RMD calculation, which effectively means that's a lower RMD amount because you have a longer life expectancy. So that is a benefit that is coming out for those that have a younger spouse that passed away. You essentially have a better RMD.
Adam, question for you: does those provisions apply to Roth IRAs as well, or just traditional IRA or 401k accounts?
Well, so the understanding as far as Roth go is that, and I believe it's 2024 Roth 401k accounts won't have a RMD requirement. So that's a change that, again, a lot of these things are in movement and contested, but as far as Roth 401ks go, my understanding is that goes away in 2024, and so there is no RMD for that.
And how about Roth IRAs?
I believe, wouldn't quote me on this, I believe there is none, but
right. So the beneficiary has the potential for deferring the distribution for 10 years, getting the growth, obviously, that the Roth could provide, and then liquidate everything in the 10th year, theoretically.
Yeah, not having that. Yeah, not having
that annual required withdrawal.
Yeah, exactly.
Good, very good. Another provision, Adam, if you could touch on, Paul hit on a little bit of the early withdrawal tax penalty relief. Again, Paul mentioned the disaster relief up to $22,000. But it has to be a federal disaster, declared a federal disaster for that distribution to not be subject to a 10% early withdrawal penalty. But could you hit on a few other of the provisions that allow for early withdrawals prior to 59.5 without a penalty?
Maybe we could get that again.
Adam, if you could hit on a couple of those, for instance, and I can hit on them too. In fact, I'll just take this one. So for instance, for those folks that are not 59.5 yet, there's a 10% early withdrawal penalty. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So the idea would be, Paul mentioned one of those provisions or exemptions that allow people to draw funds without the penalty. But if you have a few, I think there's a number.
There's quite a few of those actually, and so this definitely applies more so even to people that are younger, and maybe there's one think about the Maui situation. So natural disasters is a big one, and that one is they have from time to time on a one-off basis. Congress has kind of come out after natural disaster and passed these one-off situations, allowing people to take these disaster distributions. And what they essentially decided to do is kind of codify that, so Congress doesn't have to, after every disaster, pass something allowing people to take distributions early from their IRAs and avoid that 10% penalty. Although they kind of reduced the amount they're allowing you to and changed some rules. So generally, when they had done these one-off situations, they had allowed you to take up to $100,000 distribution from the account and avoid that 10% penalty. They've reduced the distribution amount to $22,000. So you can take up to $22,000. It has to be within 180 days, I believe, of the disaster, and it has to be a federally declared disaster. But you can take $22,000 distribution, so it's a reduced distribution amount, but they've added a $100,000 loan amount that you can. So you can take essentially two things. You can take a $22,000 distribution, avoid that penalty, and they also allow you to take a $100,000 loan, up to $100,000 loan amount. I believe there's so it's either 100% of your vested balance up to $100,000 loan. So if you only have 50,000, obviously but it has to be vested there too. So it's 100% of your vested amount, in your 401k. So that's a big change and kind of relevant as current events have been taking place. Another is terminal illness. So terminal illness is another one, and they have changed the definition. A lot of other places in tax code and things like that for terminal illness has been a shorter time frame, I believe 3 years or so. Don't quote me on that number, but I do know that the new definition for terminal illness for this purposes of distributions is 7 years. So if they've given you, 6 years, then that would now qualify versus the more strict interpretation of a terminal illness before. That's another aspect that they've given. Another one which is a much broader one, applies to victims of domestic abuse. And so that isn't effective yet, but in 2024 becomes effective, and it's the lesser of $10,000 or 50% of your vested balance. And so that's the amount for, and that is actually, and it's broader than, so it's not just physical abuse, it also could be emotional or economic abuse, and it's something that is self-certified. So it's not, so it's something that the person taking it can certify. So it's broader, but that's also why they limit the amount to $10,000. In that case, there's also a much broader term, which could almost apply to anything, which is called the emergency withdrawal exemption. And that one is very limited in the amount. It's only $1,000 that you can take out in that case, but it's anything that's essentially an unforeseeable financial circumstance or family emergency and that sort of thing. That avoids the 10% penalty. And the last one is also for qualified long-term care. So that one though is not starting until 2026. So again, we said there's different implementation timeframes. Some of these that I've read are 2020 next year. So this one's 2 years out, but that applies to long-term care, and that is I believe $2,500 indexed to inflation. So again, kind of a litany of different ways. It's obviously they're trying to give flexibility because they also want to, in a way, you're saying this is hindering because you're taking away from that money that would grow for your retirement, but they also want to encourage people to put into things, because some people might not contribute because they think they're too locked up, they don't have any access to that. But by giving these more exemptions for those purposes, in a way, it could encourage people to put it in, knowing that they have different ways that they could access some of that money without a penalty.
Yeah, that's great, Adam. Thank you. And just keep in mind, folks, too, that this is avoiding the 10% early withdrawal penalty, which applies to folks that are not 59 and a half yet. So it doesn't eliminate the taxation on these distributions, just the penalty. So again, there's provisions there that you've got to keep in mind if any of these are applicable to you. One last thing, Paul, I'm going to have you address kind of the final kind of one is the expansion, if you will, in one of the provisions that allows for lifetime annuity contracts. So it's kind of a difficult thing maybe to understand. We don't have to get too far into the weeds there, but maybe just hit some of the highlights on that provision, if you could.
Sure, Tim, let me touch on that. This is called, and some of you that have done a little bit of reading in advance of this have noticed the term qualified longevity annuity contract. And essentially, you just boil it down real quick. And essentially what that means is a retiree. So this is for those that are retired, and you can take money out of your IRA rollover, 401k actually too, and it can go into what's called an annuity contract. Now, that's nothing new. You could do that anyway. But what the qualified annuity contract does this, and you're familiar, by the way, with a deferred annuity. Deferred annuity says you deposit money into a tax-deferred environment, annuity. That can be qualified, which means an IRA, or non-qualified, which means it's not an IRA, and it grows tax-deferred. You can take money out whenever you want after a certain age, typically, or after a certain penalty period. The other annuity you may be familiar with is what's called an immediate annuity. It means you deposit money into an insurance company with an insurance company. They're going to pay you an income. Typically, it's a lifetime income or it's an income for 10 years. It might have a spousal option. But what the qualified annuity contract does, it combines both of those. It says that what you can do as a strategy is pull up to $200,000 out of your IRA, put it into an annuity. And this might be, by the way, hypothetically, maybe you do this at 60 years old, 70 years old. Let's say 60 years old. And what happens, you pull that money out. Now, the idea is that that income is deferred. It's deferred until a certain period of years. You specify the years, by the way, up to age 85. At 85, hypothetically, then it pays out an income. And income is based on the increased value of those dollars. They say, why would someone do that potentially? Well, one, if you pull money out, remember, if you're doing it at 60, when you cross your RMD age, 73 or 75, you don't have to take an RMD on that money. So it eliminates the RMD from that portion, so it reduces your RMD. Second thing it does, it can also, we've talked about staged income in our planning that we've done with income. Second, it can be a second stage of income, which might happen at age 80, might happen at 85. Now, does this apply to an awful lot of people? I don't know that it does. What you're finding is that this is still relatively new. You're finding even a lot of advisors are getting their hands around this. Point is, it's a provision that's designed to help provide additional source of income should you decide to do that. And that would be coming from an IRA rollover. So again, that's in there, Tim. Again, I won't go into any more detail there. It's something that may apply to some, wouldn't apply to others. And we're going to do some more investigation on that, by the way, as we move forward too, as a team.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you, Paul. A lot to kind of go through, and a lot of little details obviously associated with a lot of these provisions. Rest assured, folks, right? You've got our team that's trying to stay on top of all these elements, the timing of when these elements go into effect. So these are things, I've said this before to a lot of you, we do the worrying for you, right? So the reality is that you don't have to worry about a lot of these provisions, but we do want to educate you obviously on these pieces, right, of legislation that are impactful, just so again, you can be informed as much as you'd like to be. So again, thank you, Paul and Adam, for kind of sharing with us, obviously, some of the impacts on those prior to retirement and then after retirement. So let's get to our third part, which is our Q&A. So I've got a few questions that have come in here. One question, and again, I'll just open up to either one of you that wants to take this on. It says, what impact does the legislation have on my retirement strategies? For instance, Roth conversions, right? So if I don't have to take my distribution at 70.5, does that impact the Roth conversion strategies? In other words, maybe give you more time to kind of implement that or stretch out Roth conversions over a longer period of time. Does any one of you want to take on that question?
Sure, I'll take that on. Feel free to add to this, Adam. I think the Roth conversion strategy, as you all know, really is a way we can pay taxes on pre-tax money in an IRA, move that into a tax-free environment, and of course, then that money can grow and does grow tax-free. Now, the benefit there is you get a tax-free growth naturally, so you're not paying an incremental tax on each element of growth. Second benefit is it avoids the RMD. And as you saw and you heard on Secure Act 2.0, that money actually can be passed on. And there's no tax to the next generation. So I think, Tim, does it impact it? I think it just drives home the benefit of a Roth conversion at an early age. Naturally, in the planning that we do, we're looking at how long money will last, what kind of return we need, potentially on an illustrative basis. And I think one of the planning scenarios would be if you're going to pass money on potentially to the next generation or you're younger, the Roth conversion still makes sense. Does it tip the scale one way or the other based on our previous discussions? I don't think it does. It's just another factor in that decision. Yeah,
great. Adam, anything to add there?
No, I definitely think it giving people much more flexibility to stretch that out.
Yeah. Another question that's come in is that did the Secure Act impact my RMD, my required minimum distribution for 2023? The individual cites that it seems like for 2023, the required withdrawal was a little bit lower than it was in 2022 or 2021. I'll take that on. In fact, I'll address that question. Is that one of the other provisions that we didn't address is that with the Secure Act 1.0, it recognized, folks, the fact that people are living longer. And so what again has happened is that the required minimum distribution table, which takes into effect life expectancies, and as we've talked about with many of you, the required withdrawal is based upon two components. One is the value of your account at the end of every year, and then a divisor that corresponds with the IRS table that corresponds to your age. And then it's the value divided by the divisor. But what the government did with the recognition that people are living longer is that they expanded the life expectancy tables and therefore actually reduced the percentage of what was required in 2023 relative to 2022. On top of that, obviously, as we all know, 2022 wasn't necessarily a particularly great year for the financial markets. So it's really both of those things contributing. One is the values were lower, right? Just due to the fact that the markets, again, had a tough year. And second is the reality of what the government did within the Secure Act 1.0, the original, which is to recognize, again, longevities for many folks are again, growing and not shrinking typically, which again, reduced technically the percentage of what your requirement was. So that's something that's now obviously moving forward in the tables that we're using. So just keep that in mind. And that's why people are recognizing the recognize the fact that, yeah, my requirement for last year was higher than it was for 2023. And again, that's the reason. Another question that came in is my kids inherited my Roth IRA or an IRA, let's say a traditional IRA. They've got that 10-year window in which to pull the funds out. Should they wait to take distributions, Adam, or should they, take them, over 10 years? I mean, what do you say about that?
I think it definitely, this is where it comes down to personal situations and kind of where your income is falling, what your kind of expectations are for your income going forward. In general, I would say it's, even though people are talking about, can you wait till the end to take it all out? Can you, or are you going to be forced to take out a minimum amount? Even with the ability to delay, you probably want to really consider how that's going to affect your tax bracket going forward. And again, expectations for tax brackets in future years. Most people don't think taxes are going down. And so again, while you might be delaying it and letting more of it grow, that may put you in a higher tax bracket, not only because tax brackets might change, but also because now you're going to be taking more in less number of years. So again, kind of thinking about how it applies to your own situation and talking individually about that.
And then just to add to that, we also know that in 2026, tax brackets will change because we know there's a sunset law with the current brackets. And finally, to add to Adam's point, which I think is a good one, is that when you remember everything in an IRA, it's beneficiary IRA or a pre-tax IRA, grows on a pre-tax basis. When you take money out, it's ordinary income. So it's taxed at your highest marginal rate. So if you effectively, if you're a beneficiary, move money out of that beneficiary IRA early, you can put it into more of a tax efficient investment strategy, which means you're going to generate hopefully capital gains, which is taxed at a lower rate than ordinary income. So it's a way of tax shifting. And finally, you can actually be potentially more aggressive because you don't have to take that money out at some point in the future. So I think there's a lot of reasons to consider besides, and again, it is about that personal decision. There's some kind of universal strategies like that, but then you also weigh it against what someone's individual income is. If they have a lower income in a certain year, that might be a time to front load it and take more money out.
Great, yeah. I think we have time for one more question, and then I'm going to wrap things up just so we can finish on time. Does the Secure Act, Adam and Paul, does it affect the qualified charitable distribution options? In other words, does that also get extended to 73 before people can use that, or does it still stay at 70.5? And what are provisions related to that that you're aware of?
Yeah, so the qualified charitable distributions is under a different code. So even when they moved it up to 72, it still remained at 70.5. So my understanding is that was not addressed or changed by this new one. So it stays at 70.5, and that $100,000, I believe, starting in 2024. The $100,000 max that you're able to do, and starting in 2024 becomes indexed to inflation. So that $100,000 will actually in 2024 start increasing with inflation as well.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's great. Very good. Well, thank you, Paul and Adam. I appreciate your insight and your input and unpacking again a lot of these provisions. There's about 11 of them we covered, but keep in mind, folks, there's 92. So there's a lot again jammed into this legislation. That's why it's so impactful and so pivotal to kind of understand the provisions again that impact you. Again, rest assured that our team is on top of these things. You don't necessarily have to kind of contemplate or worry a lot about them. A lot of these things will be unpacked in the context of our reviews and our ongoing planning meetings. And we'll continue to try our best to keep you informed. Another thing too is that we will be sending out a replay of this, and we do have some additional information in essence that kind of unpacks some of these things that will be attached, or we'll have a link set to our website, so you can go to our website and find some provisions and all these elements that are in the Secure Act if you want to dig into it in more detail. So thank you again for everybody. I appreciate your time. And again, just keep on mind that for those of you whose questions we didn't address, I'll have somebody from our team reach out. And here's our next event, October 25th, 2023. That's going to be a live event up at Newcastle Country Club. That's kind of our capstone event for the year. And looking forward to seeing a lot of you there. As many of you can make it, we try to make it a really nice event. So thank you again, everybody, for your time. And thank you again, Paul and Adam, for your expertise and for sharing with us, again, some of these provisions. Again, have a great day, everybody, and look forward to seeing you and talking to you again real soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.